But first, we're going to start with my favorite segment, which is the smart people saying stupid things about real estate. We've got an audio clip here by a gentleman named David Korn. He was interviewed on MSNBC. He's the Washington bureau chief for, you ready, Mother Jones Magazine, and he's the editor of politicsdaily.com. And David Korn is just today's example of people who I'm sure have advanced degrees and I'm sure are nice people and they're really accomplished in their fields, but they don't know jack about the real estate market, and they go out there and they comment on this and they scare people and they talk about things that they just don't understand. So let's play the clip of David and we'll talk about it.
26% or so of houses are underwater. I spoke to a big-time financier this afternoon who says he thinks by the end of next year or 2011, almost 1 out of 2 homes could be underwater. Now, what are people to do in that situation? Obviously, what the New York Times story is advocating is not for everybody, but there are some people who are paying, who it would take 60, 70, 80 years to get back the worth of their homes.
So I don't even know where to start with this guy. Okay, so let's start with, you may have heard the statistic that 1 in 4, or roughly 25% of all, in his case, he's saying houses are underwater. That statistic was derived from a study that was done by an outfit called CoreLogic, whose number is accurate, but let me show you the many ways this man misread this stat and has used it to trump up the fear on the subject. The statistic is that 24% of mortgage borrowers are underwater. Okay, so people who live in homes, people who are homeowners, people who have mortgages, 24% of them are underwater. Now, that's a scary statistic, but in the United States, here's the accurate statistic. There are about 120 million households in the U.S., all right? Of those 120 million households, 1 in 4 are paid off free and clear. 1 in 3 are owned with a mortgage but have equity. Okay, 1 in 3 are renters, and 1 in 11 are underwater. So it's something around 9% of all the households in this country are underwater, which, again, is a big stat, but it's nowhere near as sexy as 1 in 4, 24% of houses being underwater. So you ask yourself, why would David Korn go out and trump that up? I would suggest to you that he just doesn't even understand what he's talking about, and he just misunderstood the fact that, you know, you talk about borrowers, they assume that borrowers and houses are interchangeable, but they're just simply not. And the fact that he spoke to some, what did he say, a big-time financier. What's a big-time financier? That sounds like somebody who's an honest person. You know, if you protest too much, that means you probably aren't. I don't know what kind of big-time financier is out there talking about how the 1 in 4 underwater houses is going to turn into 1 in 2 underwater houses by next year, but I think he was talking over a couple of cocktails, maybe more than a couple, and the big-time financier knew about as little about the housing market and the real estate market as Mr. Korn did. The last thing he said, that it's going to take 60 or 70 or maybe 80 years for the value in this property to come back. That is an astounding prediction by somebody who, again, doesn't seem to know what he's talking about, because we're going to talk today about the real estate cycle and give you a sense of when you can expect values to come back based upon the historical performance of real estate. But 60, 70, 80 years, I know where he got this, because some egghead in Southern California came out with a blog study a couple of months ago where this person's modeling showed that it was going to take 60 years for home values to come back. So this other guy was predicting a totally unprecedented historical event. And then David Korn from Mother Jones Magazine picked it up and ran with it and decided that 60 years wasn't enough. So he trumped it up to 60 or 70 or 80 years. So David falls into the category of somebody who is not going to make you any money, because he is somebody who is very comfortable predicting the worst. He's comfortable predicting the worst that has ever happened in the history of the housing market. And I think we're going to rename this segment, instead of smart people saying dumb things, we're going to call it the Weenie of the Week. And we're going to give the Weenie of the Week award to David Korn for, I think, in 11 words. He said like 9 stupid things in an 11-word segment there. So that's pretty bad. So congratulations, David. We'll send you your trophy in the mail. We have another person here. Now, in the quote here, he referenced the New York Times story. And what he's talking about is that a couple of months ago, there was a story written by a gentleman in the New York Times, a guy named Roger Lowenstein, who was a writer for the New York Times Magazine. And Roger wrote a story where he advised people to just walk away from your mortgage. So if you're underwater, if you borrowed too much, Or if, let's say you bought in 2005 with no money down and the market came down, so you had some terrible timing, didn't put a down payment down, you've lost equity. Or, which is more likely the case, you bought back in 2000 or 2001, you made a bunch of money on the property, but then it devalued. But at the peak, you took a mortgage out on it, a refinance, cashed out, took all the equity out, used that equity hopefully to send your kids to college. Hopefully you didn't blow it on, granite countertops in a hot tub. But either way, you got the use of the money. Now the value of the property's gone down, and Mr. Lowenstein says, walk away from your mortgage. So let's hear a moment of what the good author, Mr. Lowenstein, says.
So why should the average homeowner make anything other than a cold, calculated business decision about whether it's worth it? If Morgan Stanley and General Electric, Capital are going to be cold-hearted about it, which they are.
Right.
I mean, the average Joe is supposed to, be stricken with guilt.
Okay, so Mr. Lowenstein is making the moral argument that since businesses routinely default on debts, if a business makes a bad bet on something and they don't like the bet, they'll default on it. And so he's making the moral equivalency that if you're a homeowner, why shouldn't you do the same? And he's referring to some statements that have been made out there about how somebody who walks away from their mortgage is doing an immoral thing. I'm not even going to touch the moral question on this. I'm just going to talk about the fact that there's something immoral about Roger Lowenstein giving people criminally negligent advice by telling them to go ahead and walk away. Because in the 13-paragraph article or column in the New York Times, all the way down in paragraph, I think 11 out of 13, he makes a passing reference to something called a deficiency clause. Now, a deficiency clause is something that probably 99% of the mortgages in most states in this country have what's called a deficiency clause, which basically says if you borrowed $500,000 from the bank and you have a property now worth $400,000 and you walk and there's a $100,000 deficiency, you're still on the hook for that deficiency. Now, historically, the banks have taken the properties back and let people skate on the deficiency, but they're not doing it anymore. Nowadays, with the volume of foreclosures that are out there, the banks are actually converting those deficiencies into judgments. They're suing the people in court, converting the shortfall into a deficiency judgment, and they can chase you for, you ready, 21 years. 21 years they can chase you for that deficiency. So there are some states that don't have that have a law against the banks chasing you for that deficiency, but New York's not one of them. New York, if you walk away, if you listen to what Mr. Lowenstein says to do and just walk away from your mortgage, I don't know where he's going to be in 20 years when you're still getting harassed by the bank for the money that you owe them. But it's just another example. This is 2 in a row of people who know so little about this subject but speak with such authority, giving horrible advice.